Hi all, welcome to the Nominator guide for the Polkadot network. As I said, I'm splitting the tutorials just to keep things, keep the individual parameters separated between Kusama and Polkadot. There's a bit of a difference and I don't want to confuse anyone. Okay, so my sources. The first thing I did, I watched Mr. Bill Laboon's tutorial. It painted a good framework for me, and I filled the gaps using any gaps that I may have had using the wiki, and also the support that I provide to users on the channel helps in my learning, and I also do note the resolutions and the responses by the seniors and add that to my own knowledge base. So, you know, I thank all parties, and Mr. Laboon, I hope that this video pays homage to your own, and you know, you don't sue me for copyright. I think my content is my own or my own representation, so I didn't copy paste anything, so we should be all good, I hope. Terminology. So there are other proof of stake based networks, let's just put it that way, out there, and the little difference that defines Polkadot Kusama is that there's a little n and it means nominated, so it's nominated proof of stake. There are two main players. There's the validator and there's the nominator. While we are focused on the nominator, I need to describe a little bit of what happens with the validator. The validator is the person who is running a node that's a computer that's on, and it is participating in the network and all those technical stuff that I said I'm not going to discuss. This is an investment series. So he does what he has to do, and there is a general payout, and the validators get a cut of the general payout. So whatever that general payout is, it is shared amongst all the validators. And the validators now, we'll get into the fine details, but basically if you back that validator, and he got a payout, you get a portion of it based on your stake, right? And that's you as a nominator. So you back the right validators, and if they become, and I go now into almost the third point, if that validator becomes active, you get a portion of the reward yourself. Your job as a nominator is to select the validators that you think will be, active and doing all the right things and getting the most reward. So you yourself get, if he gets a higher cut, you get a higher percentage of that. So you get more, the more he gets, the more you get. So there's a direct relationship. So active, not once a validator meets the criteria, he has that minimum stake, and I think right now it's almost 1.7 million, right? Once he has that stake, he is eligible to become an active validator. So he goes into a pool, and every era, validators are selected from that pool or elected from that pool to become active for a particular era. Bond is a term we quite frequently use stake. However, in Polkadot, it's a bond. I do, coming from a contracts background, and well, I don't want to reveal too much, but I do relate better to the term bond than stake. I think it's quite suitable, a very intelligent representation of what it is. Because basically you are placing a bond, you are backing that validator so that he can do his job. And if he doesn't do his job, your bond becomes at risk. Or you can share in the rewards. And as I will describe later, you can probably get no rewards. On-chain and off-chain. On-chain, simply you're interacting directly with the Polkadot network, no middlemen. If you use polkadot.js, that's an example. Off-chain, you're using a middleman or middle person, such as an exchange. All right, so before we get into any of the details, you need to make a decision whether you want to go on-chain or off-chain. And I hope I'll provide you enough information to make that decision. One, it depends on your stake. You need a minimum stake to receive the rewards, or to receive a reward on using on-chain staking, right? That amount at the time of recording this video, it is about 130 dot, and it changes, right? So if you have 100 dot and you stake, you would not get a reward if you're doing on-chain. If you're off-chain, you can. The second one is your time. On-chain staking is an involved process, or I should say, to reap the right rewards, it is an involved process. You should, one would expect that you invest the time to get this thing done correctly. And if you're and there's no insult in this, a lazy investor, it may not be the right thing for you. Risk tolerance, as I mentioned before, there's a higher risk that you can, one, not get the highest, you can get a negative reward, that means your bond was slashed, or it can be that you get zero reward, and I will demonstrate how that can happen, and it is possible that you can get a higher reward. So your tolerance for these things really plays a factor in whether you go on-chain or off-chain. So I'm going into a little more detail on the pros and cons of each. So let's look at off-chain. This is like an exchange where you go to Binance, Kraken, and perhaps there are others, no promos. The benefits, as I said before, you can enter, you can receive a reward even though you have less than the minimum amount. Simple one-click staking. Basically, hey, this is how much I have. I want to stake it all, and hit stake, and you just wait for your rewards. Usually, if you want to unbond, it takes little to no time. I do put a little asterisk in that for some reason, I remember that Kraken had something in a fine print or something like that they reserve the right to 28 days or 7 days, as in the case of Kusama, to unbond. They reserve that right. But of course, if they can do it sooner, they will. And we need to appreciate that even though Kraken and Binance are offering staking, it's not that they are doing something that's, they go back to the chain. They have their validators, and you will see them around. And, they're held to the same rules. So if every single one decides to unbond at the same time, there may be an issue. And that's where that fine print comes in. On the exchange, it is an environment for resale, which is good, so that if you are totally in investment mode, you're staking, and then the price of Polkadot spikes, and you want to take advantage of that by selling some of your currency, you may do so. You're already in the right environment. To do so on-chain, you will need to send it to the exchange at first, and then you you sell to whatever fiat currency. Now, I said with the Kusama video, I hope if you sell your Kusama, you go to Polkadot. And for the Polkadot video, I'm saying I hope if you have to sell your Polkadot that you're reinvesting in Kusama. So we are trying to keep it in the family. Fixed rates of return. One would imagine that on-chain, with the possibility that you may lose, you may get nothing, and you may gain a bit more, it fluctuates. But with the exchanges, they give you a flat rate, and really, if they should benefit beyond that flat rate, they keep the reward. That's theirs. So they take advantage of that position, and they give you security. And some may think it's a fair deal, and it is up to you. And I think there are so many that think it's a fair deal that it's already quite lucrative, and we would see so many validators from these exchanges. So it clearly is to many a fair deal. So some of the cons, payouts might be less frequent. With Kraken, I staked with Kraken already, and it's 2 days a week you get your payouts, versus on chain where you get your payouts every era. Your private keys are held by the exchange, which is a big no-no to many, but some may not mind. Another con is that there's no mechanism for community participation. That's the governance aspect, where you can vote and all those sort of things. And it is something I will probably capture in some other videos. So let's look at on-chain. You can use polkadot.js, and most recently you can use Ledger Live. Ledger Live is a bit new. So I won't cover much of that, but I'm sure as it matures, it will have all the functionality that we are looking for. The benefits of on-chain: you get payouts every era, which is 24 hours. You have the potential to earn more by good validator selection. You keep the keys, it is your dot. Hopefully you keep your keys quite safe, and you act responsibly with it, so it remains your dot. You can participate in community voting. Some cons, as I said, a minimum bond is required, which at the time of this recording, it's 130 dot. A con, again, it requires frequent monitoring. This is an involved process, and you'll see some of the parameters as we continue in the video. It requires some understanding of the system and how things work, and I hope this video helps with that. And the final one, there's an unbonding period of 28 days. Okay, so let's just talk a bit about the setup, and I will link to Mr. Bill Laboon's video, and he goes into some of the details with regards to the account setup and those kind of things. So I'm just going to touch on it at a very high level. One, you need to set up your accounts, you need a stash, and you need a controller. The stash is where you're going to put most of your dot, and the controller you should put like a nominal amount. In my understanding, this relationship, stash and controller, is such that the controller, the stash, you try to minimize interaction with your stash, and you use the controller as a shield. So if there's any compromise or anything doesn't happen properly, your controller is the one that's has the higher probability that he will, he's at the front, so he may get compromised first. So, and normally you would keep a lower amount in your controller, so it minimizes your risk. This is my humble opinion or humble take on that relationship. So once you have set up your accounts, you have put most in your stash and a nominal amount in your controller, you need to you go across to the network staking, and if you're using a ledger, you create a stash, and in the stash you specify the accounts to be stash and controller, And if you are probably using anything else to form your accounts, you can just probably do the plus nominator, right? So basically you will be able to specify what's your stash, what's your controller, what's your bond, and where the rewards would go to, and should it be bonded again immediately. So now that you have your account set up, you created your stash and you bonded, most people from what I see on Discord, they think that's it, and they hope for rewards and nothing happens. That's because you have another step. You need to nominate validators, right? If you don't nominate any validators and you just bond, no reward. Nominating validators, you can nominate up to 16 validators. And why is that important? It's important because, as I described before, not all validators make it to the active set. So if you only selected one or two and both don't get into the active validator set, for that era, you don't get a reward. So you try to select as many as possible to improve your odds. Finally, you may not get the reward from the validator. So if a validator has more than 128 nominators associated with him, anyone beyond that 128, so Mr. 129 and 130 and 131, they won't get a reward. Right, so that's a 0 reward if you are nominator 129 or 130. Now, how does this happen? The nominators are assigned, a nominator nominates a validator, and even you have so many nominators nominating validators, and it is possible that there's a very attractive commission and all these other parameters for a particular validator, and everyone selects him, but it's the change is not seen as to how many nominators he has until the era changes. So when the era changes, we realize that everyone in the previous era wanted to nominate this guy, and all of a sudden he has too many nominators. So it's something you need to pay attention to. So let's look at some selection criteria for the validator. 1, let's look at the financials. Commission. Generally, you would like to select a validator with a low commission. I do have a demonstration that I will, when I close off the presentation, I'll open up Excel. It may not always be the case, but it is something that you need to look at. What's the commission? What's the self-stake and the other stake? So the self-stake is the validator's commitment that, he's going to, this is his own money and it is at risk in case it gets slashed. If you find it's high, it's generally good, because that means that he's committed and he is in the game with you. The other stake is also important because you get a percentage, it's proportional. So if there's a lot of others involved, you get a smaller percentage, right? So remember, it's proportional. It's your stake divided by the total stake, and that's how you get your portion of the reward. Again, I'll discuss that later on. Era points. Era points are important because era points represent achievements within the active while you're an active validator, and more era points means that you get the validator gets a bigger slice of that overall reward. Again, I will kind of touch on that a bit more. Other aspects, verified on-chain identity. Something that I find that's missing in person selection, you should try to select someone that you are familiar with, he is committed, and you can interact with him or her, that person, in the event that there is an issue occurs. So what this verified or chain identity means is that there's, as simply put, there's a little green circle with a white tick, and if you click on that person's name, you get some links to contact them. You may get an email, you may get a Twitter account, or you may get a Riot account, and you can message them and let them know that, you know, hey, I'm having a problem. Oops. One common thing is that people send the validators currency instead of bonding. That I have seen that happen perhaps a little too frequently. And fortunately, in all of the cases that I saw, the validator gave them, confirmed, and gave them back their currency. You know, so don't make that mistake. It's bonding and nominating, and not sending. Uptime, of course, you want to make sure that the validator is up as often as possible. Third point, history of persistent slashing. If it is that you notice that a validator was slashed once or perhaps twice, and it's very, very infrequent, and or maybe it occurred in the earlier eras and not in the latter, you may want to give him some consideration that, you know, it was probably a one-off during a learning period or something like that. You know, we ask others to forgive us, and you know, perhaps we should also be forgiving in kind. Fluctuating commission. So sometimes, I think we are all familiar with this term, a bait and switch. So you attract someone with a 3% commission or 2% commission, or hey, a 0% commission, and you let it ride for a bit, and then for a couple eras, you switch it all the way up to 100%, and you collect all of the payout, and your nominators get 0. So that's being very malicious. Another take is that you bait people with 0, and then you gradually move up to 10. You know, so it's something to look out for, and you have the history just to see if this validator is being mischievous. Frequency that the validator is in the active set. Obviously, you want a validator that's actually getting a reward, so you get a reward. Alright, so I'm going to take a look at the targets page. Let me get my pen up. Okay, so we can see here that we have a few validators, and some of the things that I discussed, if we look at payout, we can see this kind of gives you an idea of when last they were in the active set. So if they had a payout recently, they were recently in the active set. These are a gauge of the numbers of nominators. So as you can see, there's quite a few. What we need to pay attention to is that there are two numbers here. There's, like, let's say 35 and 194, and then we have 156 and 1177. And what I would like to point out is the first one is the number of nominators that made it into active nominators, and the other is inactive nominators. So if you as a nominator, you may select so many, you may select 16 validators. You can't expect to receive the reward from all 16. You are only assigned to one. So you select 16, but when the era begins, you only have one active. I should use the term generally only have one active, and I won't labor on that point, but let's, for all intents and purposes, say one active validator for every era. And you may find that a lot of people may select a particular validator because the commission is very good. So if we look at this one, the commission was 0, and that means that whatever the payout is, the particular nominator, the particular validator gives it all to the nominators, right? And he gets, well, he has a stake in it as well, which is in this case his own 3 dot, right? So it attracts people, but in this case it attracted too many, and he went over the 128 number, and he has several nominators who are not going to receive a reward, and we will see that designated by this icon here. So let me erase that. It's this. There we go. That one, that red thing. Okay, so we would notice that any one, if we look at this number here, that's the number we're focusing on. Anything 128 and less doesn't have that little red icon, and anything that has greater than that 128 has that red icon, and that means that that person is oversubscribed, and some people are not going to get a reward. You can also look here. These are the number of people that, nominators that selected him. That's the second one. So let me erase, keep the focus. Right? So out of a possible 2,835, only 109 was selected. So the chances that he can get more than 128 is high, and that's something you need to pay attention to. Okay, so we look at the commission. I think that's pretty straightforward. The total stake, self-stake or own stake, and other stake, again, all pretty much well defined. There is, and from nominating or network staking, and then you go to the targets tab. This is what we're looking at. There, you can nominate from this tab. There is something that I found was it wasn't as visible. There's a checkbox, so I'm going to just circle the checkbox. That, my friend, is a checkbox, and it goes all the way down, and you can select for your particular validator, and there's a little button that says set nominees or something like that to the top. So it's an easy way for you to select your validators. Now, I guess before we go on to the next page, there's a little information type graph thing to the right. You can do so for each of the validators. Okay, so let's look at some stats. The era points are awarded to a validator if they produce blocks or they do something significant during their stay in the active set, and it is directly proportional to the reward. So as we can see that this graph here, more era points that you get, the higher amount of Kusama that you, Polkadot or dot that you collect. So you would want to take or select a validator that is generally doing well in his production. Okay, so as we look to the bottom so we discussed era points. Now we're looking at rewards. You would notice that the general reward is someplace between 800 and 1,000 dot, and that now is split amongst, commission is taken first, and then the rest is split. Elected stake, well, as I said, your stake would differ depending on the number of or who is nominated, or your active nominators. So this just gives an idea of the total stake, the elected stake, which may not include the self stake, over a period of time. And finally, the commission. Now, I mentioned a little glitch, right? So this person is actually 0 for most of the time, but for 2 eras, it looks like, they went right up to 100. So they collected the full commission all for themselves during that time. And then they quickly went back to 0. I don't know the exact circumstances, but it doesn't look too nice. What it would mean is that if the reward is, let's say, and for argument's sake, 800 dot for that particular period, the validator took all 800 and none of the nominators got any. Right? So 0 reward. Again, I don't know the circumstances, no names are called, but it's something to look out for. Okay, so that's it for the presentation side of things. I wish to open Excel. Okay. Actually, before I do so, let me just take a quick look at the Substrate portal. This is a quick example. So in this case, we see 128 nominators, and these 86 are red. These persons were not awarded any reward. Okay, so it's just a note, and to get a better idea of what's happening. And you see this little icon. This is the oversubscribed. Sorry, guys, you got no reward, and it goes on and on and on. Okay, so let's get back to this Excel. So what I did, and you can read the numbers, I'm focusing on table 1. I tried to create a scenario in which there's a commission of a high commission, a low own stake or self stake, and that's validator 1. And the second one, you have a low commission and a very high own stake, or a sufficiently high own stake. And what I try to represent is a scenario where you're just looking at commission and stake, and you may think that validator 1 is really bad because he has a high commission and he's not showing any commitment of his own. And that usually results in others not really paying him much heed, and they don't get, he doesn't get as much other stake. Validator 2 is quite attractive, and he may also be oversubscribed because 2% is pretty good. He has his own stake in, and so he looks a lot more attractive and more people come to him. So that's a scenario I tried to build. So what we look at in table 2 is a possible, we apply receiving 1,000 dot, the validator gets 1,000 dot, that's his share. Your share as an individual is 150 dot. How much do you get on validator 1 and 2? So the first thing that goes out is the commission. So 5% goes out for 1 and 2% for number 2. So we represent those figures. So the validator gets 50 dot, and the second validator gets 20 dot. So that's not too bad. The rest of that 1,000 is split by stake proportionally. So the validator, number 1, he doesn't have that much in, so he gets quite a smaller amount of the rest. In validator number 2, he gets a bit more because, he contributed a bit more. The nominator, interestingly enough, the nominator gets more from validator 1 than validator 2. And why is that? It's because the total stake was much less in validator 1 than validator 2. And as you're getting a proportion, having a smaller total stake is favorable. It puts you in a better position to get a piece of the pie, or a larger piece of the pie. So, I don't want to labor on it too much, and I will put a link to this calculator or this Excel in the comments. But you need to look at all variables, and that's all I'm trying to emphasize, that if you only look at commission and own stake and not the total stake, you may lose out. In this case, and it's also, I tried my best to sort of use realistic numbers. So the payouts it's not life changing, you know. I mean, the validator payout looks fairly decent, but you know, when we look at Kusama, it's not life changing. And there seems to be this perception that I want to run a validator node, there's going to be massive earnings and so on. You need to do the maths, and you're not always going to be selected in the active set. And if you're renting a server, that's a cost that you have to bear. Regardless of active set or not, you have to bear that cost. I can say in my own calculations, and again, I'm quite generous in my specking of my own validators. On Kusama, I'm not eligible for Polkadot. And for me, if I am selected as a validator, I put my percentages down, my probabilities, I may recover about half of the cost that I expend for my renting the dedicated servers. So you need to do your maths. Supporting the network is great, and I'm all for that. But if it is, and as I said, and this is an investment series, you need to put some numbers down in Excel, put it down in paper, and do worst case scenarios and best case scenarios, and see if it is worth it for you. From a strictly, and that's strictly from an investment standpoint, which is the theme of this these videos. So yeah, so to each one there you have your own scenario, and I hope that this video helps. And I have given up on begging for nominations, so I'm just going to do it out of love. Right? So yeah, so if this video is helpful and you can forward it across to someone and they also find it helpful, that's the reward for me. Okay, so take care. Goodbye.